Well, welcome, Spencer and Dr. Prather. And Spencer and I are going to share your story. And let's start with what condition, tell us about the condition that brought you to holistic integration.
Yeah, so in 2021, I had a traumatic injury to the cervical spine, and I ended up walking away from that injury with three torn muscles in my skull and neck area, over a dozen torn ligaments, some nerve injuries in that area. And so, needless to say, I was in pretty rough shape when
Sure.
I showed up here my first day. I remember Doc kind of looked at me like, we got some work to do with this guy. But I had already had a decent idea of what I had needed. And it was actually through a personal referral that I had found this office. One of my diagnoses was upper cervical or craniocervical instability. And so, what really brought me to holistic integration was Dr. Prather had experience, hands on experience of not just treating those patients, but seeing those patients get better. Yeah.
Yeah, I when you came in, you were one hurting guy. I was, and one of the things I wanted to do is because I understood where you were coming from,
Mhm.
and I understood a lot of the fears because you had gone through so much. And so what I wanted to do is kind of reassure you that I knew what I was doing and that we could help you, which I absolutely knew we could.
Yeah, most
So,
definitely. And I'll say this, Doc, you were, of all the different practitioners and physicians and everyone else that I had seen, you were the one person that spoke with a certain confidence saying, I've seen this before.
mm,
I actually know what it is that you're experiencing. And I can't guarantee you 100%, but I can help and we can help you heal. We can help you heal in multiple ways. And that was one of the things that I think really kickstarted my healing and recovery process.
sure. I could kind of feel you just kind of relax,
Yeah.
which was important to see because you need to have the patient on board,
Yeah.
have the trust that we're going to see you through. Because when you're talking about healing, there's all this up and down type of stuff. It's never a straight line type of healing.
Right.
But if we can establish the trust that, we are going to take that person to a much better health condition, then they have the confidence to stay with you, go through the process, and actually get better.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Spencer, what kind of treatment were you receiving prior to coming to holistic integration?
Yeah. So I had done multiple things. I think some of them quite helpful, some of them probably a deterrent towards getting better. So the first actual procedure that I had done was called a bilateral styloidectomy procedure. And one of the things that we found during all of my imaging was that I had calcifications of ligaments that run basically from the base of the skull to the hyoid bone and then also connect into the jaw area. Well, I had those surgically removed because they were calcified and they were pressing into nerves and different vascular bodies. And so, on one hand, that was somewhat helpful because I was in a position where my brainstem was getting compressed because my atlas was misaligned. I was having critical nerves get, pressure that shouldn't have been there. I was having, veins and arteries get compressed when they shouldn't be. And so while that was helpful, my biggest issue in my belief, and I think we share this belief, is that with my atlas out of alignment and with those soft tissue injuries with the muscles and tendons and ligaments in the area, that it actually added to and compounded the instability part of the equation. So that was one thing that I had done that, and honestly, probably the one thing throughout my recovery process that if I could have done it differently, it probably would have been that to maybe push that procedure and try some of the other things that I think ended up really working. The two other things that I had done prior to coming to holistic integration were the stem cell procedures that I was receiving, and those were at a facility out in Denver, Colorado, to where they actually pull stem cells out of the bone marrow and inject the injured sites. Those I think were actually quite helpful. And then I had also had PRP or platelet rich plasma injections into some of the other areas. And then also some nerve hydrodissection treatments to help those nerves get either freed up from fascia or different muscles, if there were, because I had a lot of things that were not in the right place, right? And so getting things treated from that lens was extremely helpful. The one thing that no one else could get right until I came to Dr. Prather was my Atlas was not able to hold an adjustment for more than 48 to 72 hours. And the interesting thing is, it wasn't just the Atlas that was out. And one of the things where I think Doc and I hit it off immediately was, yes, your Atlas is out, but there's other things impacting why your Atlas is not holding. It's maybe something with the jaw, or something with the sphenoid, or something with actually the pelvis, or something to do with your posture. There's different layers to the reasons why these adjustments hold or not. There's also functional things that I had that were going wrong. I had SIBO, SIFO, leaky gut, different toxicities, different mineral deficiencies. All of these things I was able to get treated here. And once one thing came back online, it was like a cascade of, instead of failures, it felt like different parts of my body were actually starting to come back online and work again. And so as I started to go through that healing process, man, that was the ultimate game changer, right?
Yeah, the whole thing is, as you're getting this all stabilized, you've got to get it in place. You've got to get it to hold so that healing can actually take place. If you're constantly moving that area up in there, that's very traumatic to the nervous system. So having to adjust it on a regular basis on that, just it throws it off. So our goal as working as with chiropractic is to get that into place where it relieves the pressure off of the nervous system, the central nervous system, the veins, the arteries, the lymphatic system starting to work. And as we can get that into place, you got to hold it there. Yeah. Otherwise, you're never going to see the healing take place. So if we can't get that to hold, we're not doing our job. And as a matter of fact, the more you play with the whole thing, the crazier the nervous system gets, because it doesn't like that.
Yeah. And I experienced that when it came to symptoms firsthand. I would initially, if I would get an Atlas adjustment, I would kind of have a calming of the nervous system. But then if something else was out of alignment, and or there were obviously other issues internal that were causing it to come back out of alignment, well, then it was like this yo-yo of symptoms that I would have a good day and then 3 bad days, or 2 good days and 5 bad days. And I felt myself kind of getting worse and worse and worse as that continued, until we were able to get it into correct place, but also take care of the other things, from whether it's the functional medicine side, or whether it's from taking care of the other structures that also play a role in making sure that that's going to hold its alignment. And so it was really, again, the combination of all of the above, and due to your experience of being able to actually help people to get not just the Atlas right, but then also know what else to look for. I remember the first time I had my Atlas properly adjusted, my jaw was out. I had other stuff going on in my skull and my shoulders and my hips and pelvis. It was all wrong. It was like, everything was out of whack. The entire shape of my face even changed within the first 24 to 48 hours. And I don't know if we can do it, but maybe even flash a photo of the before and after, because I still have it somewhere, and just how different my whole face looked, because I was finally getting blood flow, or the lymphatic system to drain properly, and the nervous system to calm down. You could really see it in my eyes. It was like seeing color for the first time in a way.
Sure.
But yeah, it was a really cool experience. And, to experience that in the first few days after having arrived here gave me a tremendous amount of confidence. Like, holy smoke, I can actually heal from this thing. I can actually come back and start living life again, because I was in a period of life where I had spent over a year either in bed or on the couch 20, 22, 23 hours a day. And before that, I was high performing at my job. I was I would argue, kind of washed up weekend warrior athlete, but I was very active, basketball and golf and weightlifting and running and all these different things. To go from one to the other, it definitely played, the mental side of things definitely played a role, right? And so to get that initial kind of shot of confidence that all right, we're on to something here, especially considering the fact that I was already doing some of those other modalities, the stem cells to help the healing and the nerve treatments. Once we got the structure part right, oh my gosh, that was an absolute game changer.
One thing that occurs when the atlas is way out, the whole rest of the body shifts to accommodate that because it's trying to take pressure off of that atlas because that is the key to your life, is that area. Now, matter of fact, if you're starving, it will actually dissolve the rest of the body to feed that area. So it's the most critical area. So everything shifts to try to help that out. And so when you put it back into place, everything starts to shift. And so people have to have confidence that yes, the atlas is in. We need to get the jaw, we need to get the skull, we need to get the rib cage, because those things can start to shift and it feels uncomfortable.
Right.
So having that confidence from the patient, the probably, I would say that I've never met anybody that I couldn't get stabilized, in all my years of doing it. But they have to give me the time and come back and let me get the jaw back into place, the skull back into place, the rib cage back into place, the hip pelvis in the place, back into place, because all that shifted.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, it felt great, for about 24, 48 hours. And then all this stuff started happening and, but you're not just your atlas.
Mm-hmm.
So then we started to get, really work on your skull because that had all shifted with it. And trying to get that all under control was the things that we did. And it just, then, everything started flowing. Yeah. And, kudos to you because you put your faith and trust in the system and then rested in that and let us work.
Yeah, to your point, so this is not a silver bullet kind of cure. It's more of a just ongoing that once we get the things right, then the body can actually begin to heal. And, I think I was just stuck in, fight or flight with the nervous system. I was stuck in just a yo-yo of health in other ways. And, it wasn't until I was probably 8 to 12 weeks into that process where, yes, I had the initial, physical change that you could see in the first few days, but I really started to feel it. It was after the end of the second or third month where my nervous system had calmed and my body was starting to function again. I was able to get my circadian rhythm back. I was able to start, digesting food properly again, and just all these other things that, you take for granted. And especially when it comes to the upper cervical neck, I think it's just natural to overlook some of those things. But those were areas that you didn't overlook, and obviously very grateful for that at this point.
Yeah. So how has our practice, or how was our practice different from some of the other things that you were trying?
Yeah. So on the chiropractic side, it was looking at the entire skeletal frame or the entire structure as a whole. And that's something that I really gravitated towards because there would be there would be times when, I didn't necessarily feel like my atlas was back out or that I had lost that alignment, but I knew I didn't feel right. Or I would have weird muscle tension in certain places, or I would still feel like my nervous system wasn't firing properly. And going to some other practitioners would be like, well, you're fine. But I wasn't. And I knew that, internally. And, that being able to partner with someone who actually understood that, okay, it's going to take more than just this one silver bullet cure. This is going to be a whole body process. This is going to be the structure function side of the care. This is going to be the internal and functional side. And so to be able to have all of those modalities under one roof, I feel like is a huge differentiating factor between this practice and a lot of other practices, right? And so if there's one thing, it would be that this office doesn't just do chiropractics. This office doesn't just do acupuncture, meridian therapy. This office doesn't just do functional medicine or balance retraining or the physiotherapy or the other ways to help the body detoxify. It's all in one place. And it is through that process that I was able to nail the structure side of things. And then once the nervous system started to heal and once these other systems started to do what they're supposed to do, now all of a sudden we have real healing at hand that is going to be sustainable over a period of time.
Yeah, the Atlas is pretty involved and it does so much, but you can't let that just overshadow everything else. You know, that's really such a key. Matter of fact, if there's one thing I can do for someone's health, is to put the Atlas back in place. Has the biggest effect on someone's overall health, but it's not the only thing.
So Spencer, can you speak to your results and how you're doing today?
Yeah, so that's the best part of the equation. So when I came here for the first time, it was in August of 2023. It's now October of 2025, and I've had to get my Atlas adjusted here a grand total of once. And I went from needing it adjusted, if not weekly, multiple times a week, to one and done. And I think that speaks volumes as to what we've been able to accomplish from a structural standpoint. But I think it's not just, to your point again, and I can't stress this enough, it's not just getting that one vertebra back into place, right? It's all of the other things that surround that. And so I've seen my mental acuity improve. I've seen my professional world improve. I went from being on multi-year medical leave to being off and running a company and being able to step back into the world of professional equities trading and investing, which you have to have mental acuity to do. And so going from basically almost bedridden to being able to operate in a high stress, fast paced environment mentally, that's been tremendous. And then being able to, get 10,000 steps a day and walk 4 or 5 miles a day, be more active, start to see some of the, physical improvement I get transposed into other areas of life. That's been amazing. And once I started to see the mental side of things come back online, then all of a sudden my ability to handle stress gets better. Then all of a sudden my sleep improves. And it's just been this kind of domino effect to where I was in rough shape. And now I'm back to a place to where I've recently started physical therapy and neuromuscular therapy. I'm hoping to, as we move into 2026, begin strength training again. And I've really actually seen lasting impact due to the care.
Yeah, when you're talking about the lower brain stem right into there, and when that atlas is out of place, there's actually a shift in the shape of that brain stem, which controls everything in the entire body. And matter of fact, you can actually see indentions if you were doing an MRI of the brainstem, if you were actually looking at it, where that misalignment is. And it takes the pressure to be off of there for 90 days for it to start to heal. So if you can't get it to hold for 3 months, you're never really going to make progress. So you've got to get that thing stabilized, keep it there, so that it has the opportunity to heal, because that's your life force. And so I will not accept that I can't get someone's atlas in to hold for 3 months, because if I can't get them healed.
And really that speaks to the time frame to when I really started to feel a bigger shift, because it was around that, once I got into weeks 8, 9, 10, 12, that's when I really started to feel a lot of improvement beyond just the things that I could physically see the first few days. And so, there's the anecdotal side of things, and then there's the medical side of things, right? And so, there's a lot of alignment there. And fortunately, I was willing to, just adhere to the process and trust that, someone with the expertise could guide me in the right direction. And here we are a couple years later, and the results speak for themselves.
So Spencer, what would you say to someone who's looking for similar care or has a similar injury?
Yeah, so in my experience, there's been 3 things that have helped me the most. The 2 things that were not at this office were the stem cell treatments and the PRP and nerve hydrodissections. I do think those played a pretty significant role in my recovery, but it wasn't until I layered on the things here where I really saw lasting change. I would feel better for a couple days doing other things. And I do think, all of the healing and the growth factors from those other treatments were great. I know we talked about that at length, that, hey, finding someone that can really help even kickstart things at a healing level, at a cellular level, even more awesome. But it was getting things aligned, taking care of the internal stuff. It was doing all of the lab work. And it was some of the most comprehensive lab work I'd ever had done. All the different biomarkers, all the different vitamins and minerals and toxicities and all the stuff I had going on. I knew I didn't feel right. I didn't know how bad those labs were going to look. And, going to a traditional primary care type environment, maybe they'll look at a few things, but the amount of things that we looked at from a lab standpoint was just so far beyond and above anything that I'd ever previously had done.
And an interesting thing is that it's everything interplays. We always say structure affects function, function affects structure. The key to our changes as far as functionally, physiologically, is one of the biggest things is the Atlas. Because quite frankly, you're never going to balance out anything unless you get that Atlas set. Nothing physiologically, nothing throughout the body will actually work properly until you get that set.
Yeah, one of the things I will say, and anyone who's been through trauma to the upper cervical spine area can relate, that it's stressful, it's fearful, because there's dozens of symptoms that can come with that. And so at my worst, I had POTS symptoms, I had vertigo, I had extreme crippling anxiety that before my injury to that area I'd never experienced before. I didn't even know how that really felt, right? And so going through all of that, it's an extremely stressful thing to go through, not just because of the trauma to the area, not just because of how critical that upper cervical area is, because of the brainstem and because of the vascular bodies and the lymphatic fluid and everything that has to be functioning properly for you to feel and function your best. But it was also just seeing that big shift in all of those neurological symptoms that came with it. I was also experiencing thoracic outlet syndrome. Wow. I was also experiencing thoracic outlet syndrome symptoms. And so I would have, I had weakness in my hands. I had issues with carpal and cubital tunnel. I had all of these other things going on. And a lot of that all came back to the neck because, brachial and cervical plexus coming out of those areas. And so it was through the combination of the modalities that I chose to run with that really made that big difference. And so in speaking to other people that are going through cervical instability or going through injury and trauma to those areas, well, this is a formula that worked well for me. And it's really been the shift of a lifetime to go from where I was with the performance that I had pre-injury to at the low of the lows, the most difficult mental, physical place that I've been in life as a whole, to now on the other side of that, whether call it hope, call it faith, call it whatever you want to, there are modalities that can actually help come back from these issues. And so grateful for having, taken the trip to be here. The level of conviction that I had, I lived in Ohio. I've got my Ohio hat on, but I sold my home in Ohio to move to be closer to here in Indianapolis strictly because of this office. And so, I know that's extreme and not everyone has the ability to do that, but it was because I knew that all of those trips were difficult on my neck. They were difficult on my spine. Anyone who's ever driven I-70 west between Ohio and Indiana, or Pothole City. And so, there were a lot of reasons why I wanted to come here, but this office and the care that I was receiving, the warmth of the staff, your experience and your expertise, Dr. Prather, I was willing to move my entire life to continue this process. And again, here I am a couple years into it, and I have life-changing results.